Hello and welcome back, dear viewers. Today we're taking a look at something that we've already looked at, so I'm not going to go over this very quickly. It is, of course, the Gen 2 second focal plane StrikeEagle 1 to 6x24. This does feature the AR BDC-3 MOA reticle, and the whole reason why I even bothered to buy this is because I got it so freaking cheap. I forgot who was selling it. It might have been PSA, and they totally fucked up. It was supposed to be, I think, $100 off the kit. And it ended up being $250 off. And I paid $160 for this LPVO with a brand new cant mount. So, PSA, if you're watching, thank you very much for not emailing us all and be like, hey, by the way, we messed up. Yeah, we're refunding you your money. So, thank you for that, because I probably wouldn't be reviewing this otherwise. When I tried to buy it, I thought it was going to be 250 bucks, and even then I thought it was going to be pretty worth it, because the Gen 2 1 to 8 was better than the Gen 1. Not by a huge margin, but enough to notice that it was a much better optic. And the 1 to 6 Gen 1 StrikeEagle was way better than the Gen 1 1 to 8, so I figured the Gen 2 maybe will continue that trend, and this might actually now be a very good competitive optic for things like the Burst Artis RT6 and the SIG Tango MSR. Those now are all within around the same price point. This actually slots itself right in between those two price point wise. So if this thing can perform as good as it should, this might be a very good option for all of you guys looking for your first LPVO. Anyway, box is standard Vortex. Gives you all the information you're going to need to know, and that's really it. It's simple and to the point. Inside, we have more of the same. Cleaning cloth, optic, battery, good to have. Our reticle manual, which we're not going to go through too much, but there it is. Very reminiscent of what they put on the Gen 3 Razor 1 to 10, except for the center dot being a little bit different, but that's to be expected. That was a first focal plane, this being a second focal plane. As far as going over the actual product manual, this is a basic LPVO. There's nothing to this that should be new to most of us. If it is new to you, if and when you get one, definitely read through that. It's worth its weight in gold. Here it is in all of its glory. The Vortex scope caps are pretty decent for the money. They are better feeling and sounding and functional wise than the stuff that you'd find on the primary arms like SLX versions. So it already has a leg up on the cheapest level of the primary arm stuff. I can't really say this would ever compete with the GLX, because the GLX is more than twice the price of these and has a lot different sort of feature set going on. Maybe with the first focal plane version of the StrikeEagles, we can start getting a little bit closer territory, but as of right now, this already stands alone with the other options I already talked about. This thing claims on the box it's about 18.5 ounces. And it's actually lighter than that. Yeah, it's actually lighter than that. 18.2 isn't bad for a 1 to 6. I don't have anything else on the shelf that's readily available to compare that with, but that's about average for what you'd find a 1 to 6 LPVO for. Starting at the back, we have a fast focus eyepiece. Very smooth, very quiet. Core to turn in. We've got a little bit of rock, a little bit of roll, but not what I would consider bad. Very, very smooth. You can see there's a little bit of grease on the outside of this to help lubricate that seal to be nice and quiet. So far, so good. Magnification ring goes from 1 to 6, 180 degrees, which is completely standard. And it was really nice of them to listen to me from my first time I reviewed this. Hey, just include a little cattail. And that's exactly what they did. Works perfectly fine. If this thing breaks off, which it probably would in most cases, look how small those threads are. It's got to be like 6 mil. Actually, probably smaller than that. Yeah, that's way smaller than that, actually. If it snaps, it should be easy enough to remove, but smooth, fast, and easy. Vortex is very good at letting you guys know to torque these to only 18 inch-pounds. Anything more than that, even though the rings might take it, you might damage the tube on these things. And that goes for their cheapest setup all the way up to their razors. They don't want you going more than 18 inch-pounds on any of their products. Because guess what? If you over torque these and you damage it, now they got to replace it. So be smart, buy a torque wrench. It's great to have. You don't want to damage any of your components. It's just a smart move. Anyway, going on to the side, we're going to take a look under the battery compartment cover. Very simple in there. I might as well throw a battery in here while I'm at it. I'm not going to use the battery that came with it because I have a brand new pack of energizers, but a very simple standard battery compartment. 3 dimples on the inside, big old spring on the outside, which I've seen on a lot of higher end stuff as well. So it just goes to show you how well these systems work. Way better than the Kales K16 or K18Is. Those battery compartments just sucked. Good old splining on the outside so you can get a really good purchase. Unfortunately, though, they did the exact same thing that Primarams did with their Micro SLX, and they made the outside the exact same diameter and style of the battery compartment cap as the illumination knob itself. So over time, if you keep on doing this, you could possibly loosen this up. However, they at least put a nice deep old coin slot in here so you could really torque that down. This way it doesn't accidentally come undone on you. As far as how the illumination control feels, Kitty, don't do that. Thank you. Just trying to play with all of my boxes. Feels good. Detent is nice and sharp, really pops into place. But you can see we have only 1 off and 11 brightness settings. Does that make or break this for me? Absolutely not. There's nothing wrong with this sort of setup. Just remember to shut it off so you don't kill your battery. Under the caps, you will see that we have some of the cheapest turrets out there. And you know, that's just to be expected at this price point. However, under their windage cap, you'll see they have a spare battery, which is really nice of them. Now, these are also the same style turrets that are found on the SIG Tango MSR, which I'm going to pull out in just a sec, but let's give this a twist. There is a lot of play, but a good solid sound and feel. You see how it pops into the detent? Yeah, it's got some play. You can see that wiggle. But once you click over, it's pretty easy to pick up on the sound. Feel not so much on the windage, but it is still easy enough to transmit through your finger. With that being said, let me roll on this thing's main competitor, the SIG Tango MSR. These things were a lot cheaper than what they are currently with the mount, primarily maybe because of my review. I'm not going to toot my own horn that much, but I think it's just ironic that they did that. Like I said earlier, these have the exact same style turrets, albeit with slightly different caps. I took this to an Appleseed event a couple of weeks ago, and you know what? I had to make some minor adjustments. And I couldn't tell what the hell was going on. These turrets, despite the fact that they are, I don't know why I capped this, despite the fact they are the same. I mean, look, even the throw lever is about the same. So we could argue this back and forth that these are probably made in the exact same friggin' facility. These turrets on the MSR, there is no positive feel, and the sound is so quiet that if you're on a range, you're never going to hear it. Whereas, at least with this, you hear that difference? You see the difference? These actually cost me from getting my expert badge. 100% blaming it on this, because I'd go to make an adjustment and it wouldn't do shit. And I thought I was clicking it, and even though I might have heard something, wasn't guaranteed. So that's the price you pay for trying to save money on lower budget optics, and that goes across the entire board. Yeah, this thing still performs really good. I like the glass on it, I like the reticle on it, I like the illumination on it. But for the price, what could you really expect? And that's something you have to understand. These are really good, but they're not going to compete with the likes of something like this. It just can't. If you can't understand the need or the necessity for a better optic, then I guess my reviews aren't really going to be that helpful, are they? Anyway, enough of me getting on and on and on about this. Let's get behind it and see if this thing is worth its price. The first thing that I'm going to point out is just how similar the reticle is to that of the SIG Tango MSR. They're basically identical. Those posts at 3, 6, and 9 are, I shit you not, basically the exact same thing you find in the SIG.
Pew pew pew.
I will be comparing this to the SIG later on in the video, and I think I'm going to do a direct comparison between this and the SIG in the very near future. Primarily because for about the same price, you get either one of these optics with a mount. Now granted,
Pew pew.
the Vortex cantilever mount is very good for the money considering it's basically free, but so is the alpha mount that comes with the SIG. However, more of that later. As of right now, what we can pick up from this thing is that the reticle is very easy to see in these lower light environments at full brightness.
Pew pew.
Even if I shut off the illumination on this thing, it would still be easy to pick up from those giant posts at 3, 6, and 9 o'clock. I'm very happy to see
Pew.
that more manufacturers are starting to get the whole point of how a 1X should operate in an LPVO. It's supposed to be really fast to get behind and get on target, and the way you do that is by being able to see the reticle.
Just pretend there's a wall here.
This AR-BDC-3 reticle really does have a lot going for it.
Pew pew.
Those 3 very large posts, a very nice fine center dot, and a halfway decent
Pew pew.
size donut to really get us in the general ballpark of where we want to aim. That fine center dot really gives us a good precision point to pick off from, and honestly, in my testing with it, it worked perfectly fine.
Pew 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 pew.
Focusing a little bit more on this AR-BDC-3 reticle, it looks very reminiscent of what we saw in the Gen 3 Razor HD 1-10. That, however, was slightly different with the center dot because that was the first focal plane in LPVO, and going from a 1 to 10 means you go from really, really small to pretty damn big. That's honestly one of the reasons why so many people like second focal plane is because the reticle is going to stay the same size, so you can have a very fine center point like we have here at 1x or 6x or any other magnification in between. As far as the rest of this reticle, you can clearly see how the drops are labeled, and we do have a little section on top for ranging. The illumination seemed really good in the garage, but in the rest of the reality, it's a little bit darker than one might hope. However, compared to the Gen 1, which you'll see by the end of this video, this thing absolutely trounces it. If you've had other cheap LPVOs or optics in general, you're already familiar with how these turrets operate, and they're not really that great. But these do have a touch more bite than the SIG Tango MSR, but that could just be a matter of this being absolutely brand new out of box versus the Tango being slightly used.
Down here with the StrikeEagle, illumination is sort of working, but again, that target is very, very bright, so the illumination is not going to look anywhere near as good. I have this clocked as good as I can, but you can see we're slightly off at the bottom, so this isn't going to be a perfect track. But anyway, let's give it a go.
The slight bit of slop in the erector leads me to believe that under recoil it could bounce around a little bit.
There's a little erector slop in there. You can see I'm twisting, well, you can't see it, but I am twisting the elevation turret ever so slightly in between clicks on the detents, and it is moving.
On LPVOs with a BDC like this and cap turrets exactly like this has, I'm fine with just setting it and forgetting it, even if the turrets don't work 100% perfectly. As long as it holds a 0, I'm happy. Despite that slight bit of erector slop, it tracks perfectly fine. Yes, it's still a mill target versus an MOA subdivision and a turret, but it's going to give you a good representation of at least when you climb with it, it's going to remain mostly in line. And like I said, you're going to set it and forget it. So as long as it doesn't lose its 0, you have nothing to really worry about. Moving on to the rooftop section. This is very important because we're going to see really, really well if this thing's got any sort of fisheye based on those power lines and that power pole. And right off the bat, you can see that everything lines up really well. We also do not see that much of the scope body, which is something that I am a huge component of. I love the fact when you can get behind a really high quality optic,
the body just disappears, and it's like you're looking through time and space at a distance farther in front of you. The most notable optic that I've ever reviewed on that has been the Gen II Razor HD 1:6. Every optic that I've reviewed since the Gen II Razor HD E has been trying to fill its shoes when it comes to that just magical ability to just disappear. As already stated, the illumination here on this overcast day is clearly only really bright enough to pick up on a very dark target or background. Looking up at the sky, you can just make out it's slightly red, but it's not going to be bright enough to draw your eye to the center like on a higher end LPVO or a red dot. But focusing on those power lines, they do not shift at all, and it is glorious. It's as nice as you really think it is to get behind. Between seeing much less of the scope body and seeing very little to no distortion at 1x here, it's already leaps and bounds better than the Gen 1. As far as the Gen 2 1:8, we're going to get to that momentarily, but until that time, just admire how good the image looks here at 30 yards at 6x. Yeah, you'll probably never really need to use this sort of magnification at this distance, but if you had to, for whatever reason or another, whether you're shooting at tin cans in your backyard, you throw this on a BB gun or an airsoft gun, you could very easily make out a lot of fine details at that close. As easy as it is for me to test how well an optic works at 30 yards, the real test of any glass is to push it out well into the distance. This section right now for me is honestly perfect because at 400 yards, which is what that brick building is, it's right at the distance where you start going from intermediate to slightly long range depending on your caliber. And that's exactly where an LPVO is designed to work effectively to, something from really close range to about this distance, if not a little bit further. I'm happy to report, as you can clearly see, at 6x at 400 yards, we have a very, very good looking image. It is a slightly overcast day, which should impede or bring about more chromatic aberration, usually of the purple fringing variety, usually on that parapet wall against those windows, or at the very top against the brick. Surprise, surprise, there's almost no chromatic aberration to speak of at 400 yards. However, if you look at the very bottom of the image at 6 o'clock, that white ledge, that's the top of a roof against that concrete building, you can make out just a little bit of purple fringing. However, it's so minuscule, I'm not even going to mark that on the tablet saying that this thing sucks for chromatic aberration. This thing's honestly pretty damn good. But without a shadow or question of doubt, the number one thing to take away from this is just how good the image looks from 1x to 6x. At 1x we already have a very flat image, and at 6x we have a very crisp looking image. But that's only 400-ish yards. Let's focus our attention now on our 800-yard power tower. And this is a good test for a number of reasons. One, the tower's at 800 yards, and those power lines are about 30-35. And on that very cloudy white sky, those black power lines really bring about a lot of chromatic aberration. Again, because we have a very high contrast edge there. But more noticeably than that, we have a little bit of green tinting, I think, at the power tower. But again, that's at 800 yards. That's really stretching this thing well beyond its capabilities. But again, it is an overcast day, and even on the best possible optics, overcast weather is the hardest for it to pull out a good image. With the Christmas lights set just so to create the perfect Christmas ambiance as we focus our attention on it yet again at our 400-yard brick building, this time long after the sun has gone over the horizon. The test? To see how much light this thing lets in at lower light environments at varying magnifications at distance. Clearly. At 1x, you can see the sky to the top right, through the scope and beyond the scope, and it looks to be about the same. Though there is a slight color difference. It's a little bit softer, it's a little bit warmer looking through the scope, which I actually prefer. I don't like it when you have a cold image. Bringing it up to 6x though, there is almost no notice of a difference to the brightness levels that we see through this optic. The illumination here is beautiful. But again, it's beautiful only in these really dark environments. Beyond that, it's just enough to create enough contrast on really dark targets. As many of you will probably know, I prefer having very bright illumination. This doesn't really cut the mustard in most cases, but as long as you're looking to create contrast with a dark environment, you're fine. But I maintain, as much as I like daytime bright illumination, especially in an LPVO, especially second focal plane, because you could see it through the shadows, at least the reticle design here doesn't make it as necessary. My home away from home has been, well, like a second home to me. It's also been the place where I've done most of my filming across all of my optics, whether it be an LPVO, a red dot, a magnifier, an MPVO, an HPVO, prisms, you name it. And this has been a staple on all of my videos. It's because of that that I'm able to take this video footage and take video footage from the first gen StrikeEagle 1 to 6. That's right. It's basically the video that put my name on the map for most of you guys because it's got a couple 100,000 views and is a couple of years old. However, things were much different back then. Namely my setup, namely my camera, namely the way I did things. And honestly, trying to watch my old reviews, I feel dirty. It's like, God, I couldn't do a better job. I've really streamlined things over the years, and as you can clearly see, as much as things change, things still remain the same. However, there has been significant progress from the StrikeEagle Gen 1 to the Gen 2 second focal plane. And if this isn't proof of that, I don't know what is. Not only is the reticle much better and easier to pick up, use, and see, the illumination's also a little bit better, and we see much less of the scope body. Despite how bad the StrikeEagle 1 looks right now as far as how much of the scope body you can see, that was where it needed to be able to look through it properly. And yeah, like I said, things have changed a lot. And most noticeably between the Gen 1 and the Gen 2. It's almost not even a fair comparison. Before we get to the rest of the comparison videos, let me show you one more time just how little distortion there is on this glass. The berm in the back is perfectly in line. The concrete wall to the left is perfectly in line. There is no twisting, there is no weird abnormalities, there's no artifacts of any sort. It is almost a perfect true 1X. I say almost because there's very, very few optics that give you the illusion that there's no glass in front of you. This is still 9 to 10 inches, maybe even a little bit further from your eye, so of course there's going to be some level of distortion. But right here, right now, the levels are so small, so low, that it's honestly brutally impressive how good this thing is for the price. Very reminiscent with what we saw with the SIG Tango MSR. Again, the market has changed dramatically, because even just a couple of years ago, to get this level of performance out of an LPVO, you needed to spend a lot of money. Over $1,000 at the minimum. Yes, there are some optics that are much more expensive than this that honestly perform optically about the same as this. But the build quality is a lot better, the illumination's a lot brighter. They just have they ooze a little bit more sexiness and maybe even a little bit more utilitarian over this. This still feels like a consumer optic, and it is because of the price. Being able to say that this will withstand wartime efforts in the Middle East or wherever the hell you want to point out in the world, it has the potential to withstand and hold up just fine, but that's not what your brain tells you when you first pick it up and you hold it and you use it. Yeah, some of the controls like the illumination control and the magnification ring are very nice, but then you have the turrets and the anodizing on it, and it just all has a bit of a tinniness to it. It doesn't fill you full of confidence. Again, with that being said though, I'd rather have an optic that doesn't fill me full of confidence and then overperforms than something that should be bomb-proof and then absolutely fails after a couple of weeks or even just a couple 100 rounds. As if the goodness couldn't get any more gooder. The Eyebox on this thing is spectacular. Again, there are many reasons why I'd pick a second focal plane LPVO over a first focal plane. The Eyebox, the illumination, and just being able to see the illumination in the shadows are just a handful. This thing absolutely performs as good as you could expect any 1X second focal plane LPVO to perform. The trend still continues here at 4X, because the Eyebox on this is very close to what you find on the P4XI, meaning it is very open and forgiving. And again, just being able to see the illumination off in the shadows, even though it's not as bright as I would like, is a very warm and welcome sight. Even if you had the illumination off, once you come out of the shadows, you have those big posts at 369 that guide your eye right to the center. It's honestly gorgeous. The maximum magnification on any optic is going to be tight. This is no exception, but it still is a little bit easier than it would be for a first focal plane 1 to 6 or some of the larger magnified optics, namely, like, for example, this thing's bigger brother, the 1 to 8 version. And that's the perfect segue to get this thing into more comparisons. The first comparison I'm going to make is actually with this thing's larger brother, the PST Gen II 1 to 6 second focal plane. This is of the time before I upgraded cameras and I really streamlined my stuff. So again, the video work is not an equal one-to-one as far as timing goes and crops go. It's a little all over the place. But I still maintain, despite how the PST might look by comparison to the StrikeEagle here, the PST is still the one to get. It's, yes, about twice the price as this StrikeEagle. But if you're looking for a much more substantial feeling optic with much brighter illumination and just a better overall sense of feel and construction, the PST is the one to get. You could find these pop up right now for around $500 with the same mount, and honestly, man, that is almost too good to pass up. But these Gen 2 StrikeEagles really, really close the gap optically. Next up is going to be with, well, you tell me. That's right, it's its larger brother, the 1:8. Here at 1x, there's very little to really compare between the two as far as differences go. You see a little bit more of the scope body with the 1:8 on the right, but the reticles are almost the same, with the exception of the center part being larger on the 1:8. And the reason for that is very simple. These BDCs on second focal plane LPVOs need to be at the maximum magnification to have the drops line up properly for whatever dope that they programmed. So if you run the 8x at 6x, the BDC is not going to line up for anything. And that's honestly the 8x's biggest problem, because at 6x, the 1:8 is actually very good, almost on par with the 1:6 version. But you have to use the 8x to use the BDC properly, and at that point, as you can clearly see here, it falls apart by comparison to the 1:6. The 1:6 on the left is gorgeous. With the 8x backed out to 6x on the right, it gets a lot better, but now that BDC is practically useless. You can only run these BDCs at the maximum magnification to have the drops mean anything. So if you plan on running either of these with the BDCs, that is the main reason to get the 6x over the 8x. It's a much more practical and usable optic as a whole. And it's still what I've maintained since the Gen 1 days. My last big comparison between this Gen 2 is with, you guessed it, the SIG Tango MSR. You tell me that there isn't a lot going on between these two as far as similarities go. We see the exact same amount of scope body. We see basically the exact same post at 3, 6, and 9. The reticles in the center are where they will differ. This is when it comes down to personal preference and what's going to be better for your setup. I cannot stress that enough. Download StrikeLock, or however the hell you pronounce it. Add in all of your information, your caliber, your bullet weight, your barrel length, your environmentals, and find out which reticle is going to line up for you better. That is the biggest thing that I cannot stress enough. One of these might line up better than the other for your setup. And going between these two, that's the only real way that I'd be able to determine which one would be better for me. Because honestly, look at them. They're almost identical in every other aspect, which is why I'm going to be doing a side-by-side comparison video with these two very soon, because you might be torn between these two because they're basically the exact same price. And just look at the image here. You can't really tell them apart. It's wonderful to see that these two very inexpensive, low-budget, minded-friendly optics are so damn good. And that's going to bring us to my final thoughts. It's a 29-minute long video. It's long enough. You've seen enough. I've talked enough. All the information that you're going to need to know is already in this video. So watch it multiple times. Make my view count be in the millions. I'd love you all for it so much. The takeaway is this. Technology has advanced a significant margin in the last few years. This optic is proof positive of that evolutionary fact. The Gen 1 was okay, and I maintained that back when I first did the review on that. Around the same time, I had reviewed the Burst RT6. In fact, it was a little bit later, and the Burst RT6 was significantly better than the Gen 1 StrikeEagle 1:6 or 1:8. The only reason I didn't roll a side-by-side comparison between this and the RT6 was simply because the video footage from that was horrible, and I couldn't really do it, and it just wouldn't have looked right. As far as how this maintains against the RT6, they're very, very similar. However, we still have a price delta, and that's the thing to hit that like button a million times. This thing is still the same price as the Gen 1 was with the cantilever mount years ago. That to me is honestly the most impressive part. Despite how much more evolved this is over the Gen 1, the price is still the same. $250 with a mount. Honestly, at that price point, you're doing yourself a disservice by not buying one of these. At that price, you can afford to keep this on the shelf with a mount, or throw it on a trainer, or throw it on a backup gun, or a loaner gun that you don't care about. Or let's say you're in the market to get into an LPVO and you don't want to spend a fortune. This is a great stepping stone to go from this to then possibly something better than this in the near future. Or running this until it explodes or falls apart, and then just getting a new one from Vortex and saying, you know what, it's good enough. Now, as far as sticking with this or paying a little bit more and getting a different optic, for example, its PST Gen II brother, I would still maintain if you can afford it, go with the Gen II PST because it is a much more substantial optic. It feels better, it looks better, it's got better illumination, but again, you might prefer this for the reticle or the price point, and there's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. Beyond the Gen II PST, to get into another second focal plane LPVO of this magnification and these sort of this exact setup, basically, you're looking at the Credo HX, the 6T second focal plane. You're talking about the Razor at that point, the Striker HD. You're talking about optics that are around $1,000 price point, and that's basically 3 to 4 times the prices of this. And if you're only worried about good warranty, good optics, and a good reticle, I don't think they're worth 3 to 4 times the price. However, that's entirely up to you to decide. If you could only afford $250 to $300 on a setup, this would be the one I would recommend, at least from Vortex. Don't forget that SIG Tango MSR is basically the exact same optic as this, which is why I'm going to be doing a full side-by-side comparison between the two to help you decide which one is better. But honestly, that's going to be 100% down to reticle options and personal preference. But if you can afford more, get more. Or just buy 3 of these and start building up an arsenal. With that, I have to thank all of you, my viewers, my Patreon subscribers, and my Subscribe subscribers for making this video possible. I bought this with my own money thanks to all of you guys, and if you use my affiliate links in the description below, it only helps this channel grow. So, thank you all very much, and have a Merry Christmas. And a huge thank you to my Patreon providers and my Subscribe subscribers. Without you, this truly wouldn't be possible. If you'd like to support my channel but don't want to join either of those, I completely understand. But you could still help by using my affiliate links in the description below, and or like, share, and subscribe as always. Again, thank you very much.